Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill. So today is election day here in the United States, and uh, of course I didn't vote for either candidate committing genocide or supporting genocide, but we'll talk about that later. First of all, I wanted to talk about the story that just came out a few days ago and has been receiving a lot of publicity, where an animal rescue in New York State had among their hundreds of rescued animals, most of them domestic animals, some wild animals, a pet squirrel named Peanut that achieved fame on Instagram with 700,000 or so followers, and also a pet raccoon, but both of whom were rescued from the wild. This squirrel, after his mom was killed by a car, and I forget the circumstances of the raccoon, but in any case, both of them, had to be rescued to save their lives. And so I'll just go ahead and uh, summarize what happened, where basically the squirrel was taken by state environmental conservation authorities in New York and uh, killed on the grounds that they suspected him of having rabies, which there was no evidence there was, because you know, uh, Peanut had been a pet for 7 years. Um, So unless he got it from one of their other rescued animals, that seems highly unlikely. But anyway, so uh, shoot, I forgot to put this on the screen. Let's see. Share screen. Okay, so many mainstream media outlets covered this. Instagram famous squirrel is euthanized after a heartbroken owner pleaded with New York State to get him back. An orphan squirrel that became a social media star named Peanut was euthanized after state authorities seized the beloved pet during a raid on his caretaker's home. And this came about because of anonymous complaints about Peanut that didn't have any substance, really, called in by people who didn't even live in the area. But like there was a lady in Texas, for example, who people found out who she was, and so she's had to shutter all her social media accounts because people were so angry with her. Um, so Department of Environmental Conservation officials took the squirrel and a raccoon named Fred from Mark Longo's and his wife's home after they carried out a search warrant, all ignoring calls for clemency. The DEC came to my house and raided my house without a search warrant. I guess they did have a search warrant to find a squirrel, said Longo, who is 34. I was treated as if I was a drug dealer and they were going for drugs and guns. So basically, they subjected them to a 5-hour search of their house, in which they ransacked the house, just upended everything, even took apart the toilet to find the squirrel and raccoon. They were not allowed to go in their house while this was taking place. Uh, there's a picture of the squirrel, or several pictures of the squirrel. Longo runs an animal sanctuary with his wife Daniela, yet it appears to have made no difference. Longo penned a sorrowful message to his followers on Friday. Well, internet, you won, he posted. For the last 7 years, Peanut has been my best friend. He's been the center of my world and many of yours for so long. I don't know how to process this emotionally. You took one of the most amazing animals away from me because of your selfishness. to the group of people who are called DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation. There's a special place in hell for you. A spokesperson for the DEC said earlier in the week how the agency started an investigation after receiving, quote, multiple reports from the public about the potentially unsafe housing of wildlife that could carry rabies and the illegal keeping of wildlife as pets. Rabies can be transmitted, but it doesn't make a distinction between wild animals and domesticated animals. And the owners were applying for a permit to keep wild animals. So they said on October 30th, DEC seized a raccoon and a squirrel sharing a residence with humans, creating the potential for human exposure to rabies. In addition, a person involved with the investigation was bitten by the squirrel. To test for rabies, both animals were euthanized, the agency said in a statement. The animals are being tested for rabies, and anyone who has been in contact with these animals is strongly encouraged to consult their physician. Did I forget to close my... Hold on just a second. Sorry. Noise in the rest of the house sometimes, which can be distracting. So, Peanut had more than 500,000 followers on Instagram, TikTok, and other platforms during the 7 years since Longo took him in after seeing his mother get hit by a car in New York City. Longo brought Peanut home and cared for him for 8 months before trying to release the squirrel into the great outdoors. Here's a few pictures. A day and a half later, I found him sitting on my porch, missing half of his tail with his bones sticking out, Longo said. He quickly determined that Peanut lacked the survival skills to live in the wild and would remain an indoor squirrel. Soon after Longo posted videos of Peanut playing with his cat, internet fame followed. Scroll through Peanut's Instagram account. It confirms he was no ordinary squirrel. Peanut would leap onto Longo's shoulder, wear a miniature cowboy hat, and eat a waffle while wearing crocheted bunny ears. Over the years, Peanut's story has been featured on TV and newspapers, including USA Today. Baking with Peanut. That's cute. And there's the raccoon, Fred, having a milkshake, I guess. Peanut's Freedom Farm Animal Sanctuary opened in April 2023 and now houses about 300 animals, including horses, goats, and alpacas. And so, basically they use the Instagram and other social media accounts featuring Peanut as a way of raising money to fund the sanctuary. And now they don't have that. Where did I put that? Jeez. Okay. Okay, let me just show you a video clip of the owner so you can get a better first-hand look from Mark Longo about what happened.
The officer opened the back of the toilet to see if I was hiding something in there. That's to find a squirrel. Let somebody come in here and do this to your house and keep it like this. I actually have broken soap bottles on the ground. I have a stain on my ground. This is to find a squirrel. This is to find a squirrel. This is to find a squirrel. You see that? That's that. See that? Do you see this, guys? You see that? You want to tell me that that's acceptable? This is the destruction that these people left in my house. So if you guys want to explain to me how this would devastate you, I have never been in trouble with the law whatsoever. There's another suitcase that came out of the closet. I don't have anything else to show you guys because the mind-blowing thing is the only places that they fucking destroyed was my room. The only things they destroyed were my room. They raided my house for a squirrel and a raccoon. The officer opened the back.
Okay, well, that's the basic gist of the story. And let's talk about some reactions to it. Well, first of all, as you might imagine, this arbitrary killing of a pet squirrel and raccoon, where the owners were following the legal steps required to be able to keep these wild animals at their sanctuary. And there was no evidence that the animals had rabies. Certainly, if a human had rabies, we wouldn't kill them or we suspected a human of having rabies, we wouldn't kill them to test to see whether they had rabies, right? So why did they do that to animals who, and certainly in cases where there are no symptoms, you don't necessarily have reason to suspect an animal of having rabies. There was no indication that these animals had been bitten by any other animals or any of that. But not everybody seemed to empathize with the squirrel and the owner. So this person, I don't know who they are, but I guess they're a Palestinian American. They say the squirrel story has gotten so much attention, coverage, and outrage in the U.S. People are heartbroken and furious over an animal killed by the government. While I was reading about the outrage over a squirrel's death, I came across a video of a 3-year-old Gazan child beheaded in an Israeli airstrike. I searched for a single page or even one headline in Western media dedicated to this beheaded little girl, but found nothing. How can the world be so outraged by an animal's death, yet completely silent about innocent children being brutally slaughtered? The hypocrisy is infuriating. Where is the humanity, the outrage for these young, precious lives? Well, I mean, yeah, it's true that media coverage, mainstream media coverage of what's happening in West Asia, the Gaza genocide and everything else that Israel is doing there, and the conflict obviously between Israel, backed by the U.S. and many European countries, and the Palestinian resistance, or just the resistance in general, Palestine, Iraq, Yemen, etc., Lebanon. Obviously, there's a lot of bias in corporate media coverage of that conflict and the Gaza genocide because imperialist interests are at stake there. Same reason coverage of everywhere else in the world where U.S. imperialism has its grubby paws, which is everywhere. You can't expect the Western mainstream media coverage is going to be objective or give you all the information you need to know in order to be able to appraise what's going on based on solid information. They're just not. In the case of an animal being killed by the government, where there's no vested interest of the government one way or another, they can cover it all they want to and cover it providing full detail and so on and so forth. So of course, of course, the world, quote unquote, mainly the Western world, is going to be, outrage is going to be widespread over the animal's death. But in spite of the obvious media bias and bias on the part of our elected officials, we've still seen an awful lot of coverage on social media, just constant videos every day of the slaughter in Gaza and in Lebanon and so forth. If you're active on social media, unless you're trying to avoid it's kind of hard to miss. And people have been outraged about it. And just because you don't have over 1 million in the street in a small country like Yemen, say, every week, it doesn't mean that, considering that this is a country that's primarily funding this genocide, and so coverage is very biased, we still have, quite a bit of outrage over, the U.S. backing the slaughter in Gaza and elsewhere by the Israeli government. We have protests all the time. So I wouldn't say the world isn't outraged over at least what information they do have on the Gaza genocide, etc. This reaction by somebody I agree with on political issues, 95 or 99% or whatever of the time, James Fauntleroy, Jay Buffon, from the Revolutionary Blackout Network, was kind of disappointing. He says, "I'm sorry, but some of y'all wouldn't care as much about a squirrel being killed if the owner wasn't a conventionally attractive straight white dude that was allegedly aspiring to be an OnlyFans model." I mean, how many people know that Mark Longo was trying to make OnlyFans videos? And how many of you, when you, if you hadn't heard about this, or whenever you heard about this story, whether it was just now for me or in the coverage in the days following it, how many of you thought, "Oh, wow, that's sure a good-looking guy. I feel bad about the squirrel being killed." I don't get this. So he goes on to say, if it were a plain-looking special needs / disabled black man or woman that lost the squirrel that way, then not as many people would have cared and even thought that person was weird for having a pet squirrel anyway. And some of y'all care more about the government euthanizing a squirrel than a genocide being funded by our government. Well, what happened to the squirrel is sad and we should be angry. Why don't I see the same energy towards what's happening to human beings? What about the black man that was found hanging from a tree a few weeks ago? His name was Dennis Richardson. Our selective outrage is appalling. Okay, well, here's what I said. I strongly disagree. The vast majority of those pissed off about the squirrel and raccoon being killed couldn't give a rat's ass what its owners look like. They care because they can relate to these animals in the same way that they do to their own dogs, cats, etc. What would lead them to not care is if they were farm animals, quote unquote, such as chickens or cows being raised for their flesh and or eggs and milk. Then our society deems it okay not to care about them. Okay, I actually had a longer tweet about this on my wall. God, how far down was it? Hold on, because I did want to read the rest of this to you. I'm sorry, this is frustrating. Okay, here we go. And I went on to say in my quote suite of Jay's comment, although, of course, it's true that there's not nearly as much outrage about the genocide in Palestine as there would be if the news media were covering it properly, or if it was happening here in the U.S. rather than in a far away land. It's not as though we haven't seen millions of people in the streets protesting, as we did over the police killings of George Floyd and others in 2020. You know, as I said to Jay in one of my other responses to his comment, where is it? And I brought up George Floyd. I said, George Floyd wasn't a particularly attractive man. He was a black man. He had a felony record, yet millions of people protested the police killing of him, as well as others killed around the same time. And I saw that you don't mention his wife, who was harassed by the cops for being an immigrant and was also the Squirrel's, quote, owner. She is a lady who immigrated from Germany, and they were harassing her for her paperwork and stuff when they carried out this raid. But yeah, I mean, Jay's premise is just wrong. It's perfectly possible to for people to care about people of color and what happens to them, if it's presented in a manner that elicits that empathy. So when George Floyd was murdered, instantly the video, the cell phone video of him being, having his neck kneeled on it by Derek Chauvin, that went viral all over the world. Millions and millions of people saw that, far more than saw videos about this squirrel being killed, Peanut. And so there was a lot of public outrage. So the idea that there's something wrong with us if we care more about the government euthanizing a squirrel, then, well, I don't think it's true that we care, that by and large Americans care more about that than about the genocide. It's certainly it's certainly something that people are very upset about. The vast majority of people polled say they oppose, and especially Democrats and independents, but even among Republicans, the majority of them oppose the U.S. Funding Israel's genocide and want it to stop. And there's been probably more protests and more militant protests of this than anything since the Vietnam War. I was part of the protests of the Iraq War in the early 2000s, and yeah, there were some big ones, but it didn't cause an entire demographic to completely turn against the party perpetrating it. It didn't change the outcome of elections, as this genocide threatens to. I don't think Trump would have that much of a chance if it weren't for the Biden-Harris administration pursuing genocide. But I mean, let's talk about this from a psychological perspective and compare it to how we feel about when other animals have bad things happen to them. So, in this article, they talk about the fact that there's a paradox inherent to eating meat. Most meat eaters, basically everybody realizes an animal has to be killed in order for them to eat its his or her flesh. And many people, regardless of what their diet is, whether they wear leather or fur or whatever, have pets, and you have exactly the same attitude toward them, of course, as people did toward this cute squirrel that they saw videos of on Instagram. And they wouldn't want to, of course, see anyone kill their pets. That would be horrifying. They would be outraged. And there's this sort of dissonance where people recognize that or feel that it would be very wrong for anyone to harm their pets, but in the back of their mind, they understand, well, animals have to be harmed if you're going to eat them, unless you are scavenger any carcasses of animals that died of natural causes or something. But that wouldn't sustain the world's meat eating habit. So that's not what's done. Basically, what we have instead are meat factories, where animals are raised as quickly and cheaply as possible to be sufficient weight for slaughtering them for their flesh to be highly profitable. But people are a little uneasy about that. They don't even want to see what happens to the animals that they eat, how they're treated when they're raised, how they're slaughtered, etc. So, given that inherently eating animals makes is a cause of discomfort for people, because they don't like seeing animals hurt or killed, because they feel bad if that happens to anybody's pet animals. But if they're meat animals, somehow it's different. Well, how is it different? Well, it's not different in terms of the feelings or sentience of the animals. A pig is just as intelligent, if not more so, than a dog, for instance. But people have to rationalize doing something that requires harm to an animal. How do they rationalize it? Well, social psychologist Melanie Joy wrote a book called Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows. And according to Melanie Joy, there are three justifications that are used to justify eating meat. Eating meat is depicted as natural, normal, and necessary. The three ends of justification. So what she argues is that through the socialization process, people come to believe that eating meat is natural, that eating meat is written in our biology. Meat is what we naturally crave, and it is what our species evolved to eat. And I don't have time to get into why those beliefs are incorrect. I'll do so in some other video. But certainly, if you look at health statistics as a function of diet, eating a plant-based diet, particularly a whole foods plant-based diet that, for instance, doesn't include certain processed foods like vegetable oil that are very unhealthy, that's when people are the healthiest and are least likely to develop heart disease and strokes, other cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, certain kinds of cancer, etc. So we didn't really evolve to eat meat. We evolved to eat a diet that's predominantly plant-based. And eating meat is normalized. That's what the vast majority of people in societies around the world do, and it's just what's expected. And eating meat is depicted as necessary. we need meat for survival, supposedly, or need to at least consume some meat to be strong, healthy individuals. For instance, most people believe that you have to eat meat in order to get enough protein. That isn't what the science says, but that's what people believe. Basically, scientists who've investigated nutrition have shown that the vast majority of Americans get actually way more protein than they need, and furthermore, that you can get enough protein, and in fact, way more protein than you need on a plant-based diet about as easily as you can on a diet that's heavy in meat. Okay, well, why do I bring this up in relation to Peanut the squirrel? Well, because none of those justifications are subscribed to by people when it comes to pets. Killing pets is unless they're fatally ill and they're suffering an awful lot. Killing pets is not regarded as natural, normal, or necessary. We just don't do that until it's like the end of their life, pretty much. And they're terminally ill, and they're suffering more than we judge they would be willing to put up with. So Peanut was simply kidnapped from this family's home based on a spurious claim. Sorry, I forgot to show you what I was reading to you. Peanut was taken from his family's home based on this spurious claim that there was a significant chance that he had rabies and that his fellow wild animal pet on that farm, the raccoon, Fred the raccoon, was likewise accused of, or they accused the owners of harboring possibly rabies-stricken animals. So, would it be necessary to kill an animal even if there was reason to suspect that they had rabies? Well, no. You could quarantine the animal until you found out whether the animal had rabies or not. And if no symptoms showed up, okay, don't kill it. If it does have if the animal does have rabies, well, you have no choice. So he or she is gonna die anyway, and you don't want to take a chance on them giving it to humans or to other animals. But that's not what we're talking about here. There's no necessity to kill Peanut or Fred. So, the rationale simply doesn't apply. Okay, back to Jay's post. Now, this is what my girlfriend had to say. She has a screen name Bob because she thought it would save her from getting sexually harassed. But anyway, she said of Jay's tweet, "This reads a lot like All Lives Matter. It's dismissive and gross. There's something weird about people who shame others for having empathy. I don't care how this animal's, quote, owner looks, what they do for a living, their race, or whether they're disabled. I have empathy for the squirrel and the raccoon who were murdered. It's like you believe human beings are victimized more than non-humans. That's the most dishonest thing I've seen on X today. My newsfeed is flooded with human beings I should care about, sometimes for serious reasons like a genocide, other times for absurd reasons, like how a male has hurt feelings because he can't do his territorial pissing in the ladies' room. As I've talked about on the show before, polls show the vast majority of Americans don't think that males, however they identify, should be allowed into female spaces or sports. So contrary to the claims of some liberals or people on the left, it's not a right wing or conservative attitude to believe that women should have private spaces and should have sports competitions where there aren't males in them. Just as people should be able to have sports competitions where their opponents aren't taking performance enhancing drugs. Exact same rationale, because males do have significant physical advantages over females. But anyway, we see coverage of human beings who are deemed worthy of caring about, which they all are for the most part, unless they're like mass murders. Not so much for animals. Okay, so she goes on to say, and you have the nerve to shit over one of the very few times the world gives a damn about an animal. Every single day, over 24 million chickens are killed. I'm not sure if that figure's from the United States or I think it's just from the U.S. Quick math. Billions of chickens are killed every year just in the United States. I can hear you groan, oh my God, she's going on about chickens when I'm talking about people. I can hear the faux outrage now. Oh my God, did she just compare a Palestinian to a lowly chicken? No, I didn't. I'm saying we don't need to ration our compassion. We can care about an endless amount of issues at the same time. Human beings suffer greatly at the hands of other human beings. While not enough people care about Palestinians, and I think your frustration is valid, even Palestinians have more than most animals, who, by the way, are getting bombed right along with humans. And to kind of underscore that point, where did it go? Damn it. On the same day that Peanut was killed, this video came across my feed where Israeli soldiers shot a horse that was carrying sacks of flour just for fun. Well, really, because they wanted to make it harder for Palestinians to, be able to transport food to people who needed it. So, even in Palestine, there's animals being subjected to suffering and death, just like humans are in Gaza. And of course, that goes on anyway, because just like everywhere else in that region, animals are killed for food. But this is especially cruel, in my opinion. And as I pointed out, this is just one instance of what's happening to non-human animals in Gaza, like that horse. They're suffering just as much as the humans. They're starving for the same reason that the people are. The blockade of food and other necessities by the Israeli government. And that was discussed at length in South Africa's filing with the International Court of Justice in January, accusing Israel of genocide. they pointed out livestock and wild animals in Gaza had a hard time finding food, and lots of them died. Lots have been killed by the bombings, and they're also, as in this case, deliberately shot. So, why do we need to ration our compassion? Why can't we care about any sentient being that deserves our concern when they're suffering? Why can't we want every living creature that's capable of experiencing joy and pain and sorrow and so forth to have as happy a life as possible? Why do we need to ration our compassion? We don't. And, we can care about all kinds of human beings, Jay, including, yes, a plain looking disabled black man or woman, or, look at the reaction to George Floyd being killed. You're not a disabled person, but, a person of color, not, an OnlyFans model, and had a felony record, a record of violent crime, and yet people, were outraged by the fact that he was murdered in cold blood on the street. Okay, just a few thoughts I wanted to share about the election, which is today. Well, first of all, I just voted about an hour ago, and this is a photo of my ballot. It is legal to take a picture of your ballot here in Indiana. And as you can see there, I wrote in Claudia de la Cruz and Karina Garcia. And that was the only option available to me as far as third-party candidates or independent candidates who oppose genocide. There was no other option for me. Well, I guess Chase Oliver opposes the genocide, so I'll take that back. But obviously, the Libertarian Party are not leftists. Jill Stein was not eligible as a write-in or on the ballot here in Indiana. Partly my fault, I guess, because I didn't gather that many signatures for her. But mainly the fault of primarily Democratic election officials who make it so difficult for candidates to get on a ballot in many states, including Indiana. But look at have a closer look at this ballot. That's too large, too small. So for president and vice president, the only third-party candidate on the ballot is the Libertarian Party. Same for senator, governor. But if you go farther down the ballot, in the vast majority of state and federal elected officials, there's only or state elected officials anyway, there's only two choices, Democrat or Republican. And in many cases, there's only one choice. So state senator District 40, my only option was to cast my vote for the only candidate on the ballot, Shelley Yoder of the Democratic Party. Same with District 61, state representative. Same with the judges. Only one option. And then if we look at the second page of my ballot, which was the page for local officials, same thing, pretty much throughout the ballot. County council at large, vote for 3 only, where there are only 3 candidates, all of them Democrats. School board, there's only 1 candidate available for me to vote for in each district. And then for the judges, it's just should the judge, whoever it is, be retained in office. So much for democracy here in Indiana. Like, I mean, they used to mock the Soviet Union for only having 1 option on the ballot that you could vote for each office. And I don't know if that was even true or not, but it's true here. Here in Monroe County, Indiana, that is unfortunately the case. So, anyway, as I've talked about here many times before, we live in a society where the 2 major parties, Democrats and Republicans, and their corporate backers conspire to make it so that third parties have next to no chance of winning. We're generally not allowed to appear in debates, at least at the presidential level. Those debates have been restricted to just the Democratic and Republican candidates ever since, I believe, 1992 was the last time that a third-party candidate, Ross Perot, was allowed on the debate stage. And that's only because he had the money, being a billionaire himself, to finance widespread publicity for his campaign and thus, attain a significant percentage of support in the polls. Whereas the third-party candidates that we have running this time are polling at less than 2%, generally speaking. Well, all of them are. They're all below 2% in almost every poll. And that's because they're not interviewed in the mainstream media. Not even Joe Rogan interviewed third-party candidates on his podcast. The Greens did get a little bit of publicity. Jill Stein was interviewed, and her running mate were interviewed on The Breakfast Club, which has a very large audience. She appeared once on, I believe it was CNN, after she was beaten and arrested at a pro-Palestine protest in St. Louis. And that's basically it for mainstream media coverage, other than in the last few weeks, there have been efforts by Democrats and the corporate media to smear Jill Stein, accusing her of having investments in or being backed by weapons manufacturers, which is, that's false. Obviously, the allegations of her being some sort of Russian asset or agent are still around, based on nothing more than a photo of her at a conference in Moscow 9 years ago, where Vladimir Putin was briefly seated at the same banquet table as she was. They never talked to each other, but people are like, that means that Jill Stein is a Russian asset, even though, of course, there are similar pictures of Hillary Clinton meeting with or dining with Putin, and nobody accuses her of having been, a Russian asset when she was Secretary of State. So that's kind of how it goes. And of course, the biggest source of smearing of Jill Stein and other third-party candidates is, well, they just want Trump to win, so they're secretly supporting Trump. Well, I mean, if they supported Trump, I mean, why wouldn't they just vote and campaign for Trump? You know, that doesn't make any sense. The other thing is, of course, there are only half a dozen states where the polls show Harris and Trump within 2% of each other. In every other state, either one or the other candidate leads by a lot more than that in the polls. More than that, typically a lot more than that. So, you have some states where one candidate or the other is ahead by like 30 or 40% or maybe even more in the polls. It doesn't matter who you vote for in those states. And, of course, even in the states where even in the states where it's close, it's not like Jill Stein supporters are secretly Democrats. Just personally, I haven't voted for a Democrat for president since 1992. It doesn't really matter given where I live. I live in Indiana, which is a highly Republican state, but I wouldn't have voted for Democrats, even if I lived in, say, Michigan. I just don't support their policies. They're warmongers. They are supporting a genocide right now. They're totally sold out to the corporate ruling elite. Why would I vote for them? Just as I wouldn't vote, for the same reason I wouldn't vote for Republicans. This is weird. It's not giving me the option to share a different screen. Okay, so I'm going to have to close this. And share the screen again. So why are they scapegoating the Greens for, pre-scapegoating the Greens for Kamala Harris's loss if she loses today? You could just as easily scapegoat Democratic voters if you wanted to. As I pointed out to someone the other day, almost 10 million people, according to a Wikipedia article on Obama-Trump voters, voted for Trump in 2016. Why aren't you scapegoating them? If you want to scapegoat anybody, why aren't you scapegoating those voters for Trump getting elected in 2016? Why don't you talk about the fact that millions of people, predominantly lower income people and people of color, and thus much more likely to be Democratic voters if they vote at all, why don't you blame the fact that millions of such people were stricken from the voter registration lists in 2016 under false pretenses, such as claiming that the same person was registered in multiple states, which is a claim you can dishonestly make if, for instance, two voters in different states both happen to be named John Smith, but maybe they have different middle names or something like that. Same thing happened in 2000 in Florida, where hundreds of thousands, or no, I guess it was tens of thousands of voters were stricken from Florida's voter registration list on the false pretext that they were convicted felons, which makes you ineligible to vote in Florida. And these voters, didn't even, in a lot of cases, know that they had been removed to voter registration lists until they went to go vote. And that easily accounts for George Bush's narrow margin of victory in 2000 in Florida, which gave him the election as a whole. But I mean, why don't we hold the politicians themselves accountable for their losses in elections. I mean, Hillary Clinton was a terrible candidate who had terrible policies, and that's why a lot of people didn't want to vote for her. Kamala Harris is a terrible candidate from an administration that is currently committing genocide, currently backing Ukraine's proxy war against Russia, where hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers have been killed, tens of thousands of Russian soldiers. It hasn't done anything but cause death and destruction. And of course, there's no prospect of Ukraine defeating the much larger and more technologically advanced Russian military. So what is the point of this? The only beneficiaries are weapons manufacturers. It's not going to result in Ukraine's government winning the war, no matter how much money, how many weapons we give them. So, of course, we can go down the line, as I talked about a few weeks ago in my There Is No Lesser Evil video, and also wrote about on Substack. On environmental policy, yeah, sure, the Republicans are worse, no doubt about that. But on the specific issue of climate change, there's very little difference between the two parties. The records for gas and oil production in the United States have been set under Democratic administrations. Barack Obama beat the record of George Bush, and Joe Biden beat the record of Donald Trump for gas and oil extraction. We've been the leading producer of oil and gas in the world, ahead of countries like Saudi Arabia, for more than a decade now. And you want to tell me, oh, the Democrats are good on climate change? Get the fuck out of here. No, they're not. And there are many other issues. You can just go down the list. Democrats want males who identify as women to be able to play in women's sports. Something that the vast majority of Americans oppose. So, in terms of the outcome today, if I have any preference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, neither of whom I can stand, both of whom I think, have terrible policies for the most part. If I have any preference between those two, I'd prefer that Trump win, just because Harris is part of the administration that's currently committing genocide, and I think that they should be punished for that. Ideally, I'd like for a third-party candidate, Jill Stein or Claudia de la Cruz, anybody who opposes genocide and supports spending our money here at home to benefit Americans for things like universal health care, free college tuition, a Green New Deal, and so on and so on. We're never going to get that from the major parties, obviously. But anyway, of course, the Democrats are, when Kamala Harris loses, which I think there's a high likelihood that she will, unless the Democrats massively cheat, they're going to blame the Green Party. Now, the irony is, who else is saying that somehow it's Jill Stein's or the Green Party's or Green Party voters' fault if Trump wins? European Green Parties are making that claim. Yes, European Green Parties are claiming that it's somehow Jill Stein's fault and U.S. Green Party voters' fault if Donald Trump wins. This is just fucking insane. Okay, where the heck is it? Thought I had it already called up. Green parties in Europe are calling for Jill Stein to withdraw. The race for the White House is too close for comfort. We call on her to withdraw from the race and endorse Kamala Harris for President of the United States. So imagine that. European Green parties don't think that Greens should be a real opposition party. They should just simply support the mainstream parties. Because that's exactly what they're doing in Germany and other European countries where the Green Party is stronger than it's been here in the United States. So due to their different electoral systems, and they're not rigging elections quite as much as Americans do, where we try to keep, or not we, but mainly the Democrats try to keep third-party candidates off the ballot. They keep them out of debates. They keep them out of the national mainstream media, and the voting system is rigged to make things more difficult as well. You have all this corporate dark money flowing into the campaign coffers of Democrats and Republicans, not to mention corporate contributions above the board directly to the candidates' campaigns and rich people's contributions. Third parties don't really benefit much from that being allowed, obviously. We have a system of legalized corruption here. But in Europe, things aren't quite that way. And the irony is that that's allowed the Greens to assume more power in government. So in Germany, for instance, a Green Party person, Annalena Baerbock, is the foreign minister of Germany, and they themselves are now corrupt. The Greens in Germany, and I think in other European countries, supported the Iraq War. They've been warmongers for 20 years now, at least, and just right on down the line. Other than on environmental issues, they are very much mainstream corporate establishment folks now. So they don't want there to be a real third party here in the United States, just as they aren't a real opposition party either. So they say, we are clear that Kamala Harris is the only candidate who can block Donald Trump and his anti-democratic authoritarian policies from the White House. You mean like when the Uhuru Three were arrested and charged with crimes that could have put them in prison for 15 years because they were opposed to the Ukraine war? Did Donald Trump do that? No, Joe Biden's administration did that. And we can go on down the line. The Biden administration and Democrats in Congress are going right along with efforts to proclaim that criticizing Israel is anti-Semitic. People keep getting arrested for their political views here in the United States, sent to prison even. So where's this so-called democracy that the Democrats stand for? It doesn't exist. Here's what Ralph Nader had to say about the election. Ralph Nader, of course, was the Green Party's candidate in 2000 and also ran independent campaigns for president in 2004 and 2008. small Green Party campaign in 1996. The reason he left the Green Party was that the Green Party was at that time starting to go in the same direction as the European Green parties, of not being a real opposition party, because in 2004 they ran a candidate for president, David Cobb, who told people in swing states to vote for his opponent, John Kerry. So, basically, he was doing exactly what the European Greens are now telling Jill Stein to do, which, of course, she won't do, because the genocide that, for some reason, Germans don't like to mention, whether it's the current genocide or the genocide that they committed 75 plus years ago. They don't talk about that in their advocacy of Jill Stein withdrawing from the election and endorsing Kamala Harris, because they support it. Well, let me get to what Ralph Nader said here. If the Democratic Party loses tomorrow's elections to the worst, cruelest, most corrupt, bigoted, misogynistic, anti-worker, anti-environment, vote suppressing, climate denying, book banning GOP in history, will there be an accounting? Will there be a cleaning of the House, discharging the colossal architects who have contracted out their trusteeship to profit-driven commercial consultants, daily wasting billions of campaign dollars on repetitive, vacuous, and forgettable advertising so they can... Kamala Harris campaigns with them, with the Cheneys and Clintons, warmongers and genocide supporters, but declines to campaign with the most popular elected official in our country, Senator Bernie Sanders. She's not sending message that could have landslided the worst Republican Party in history. Well, I have several disagreements with Ralph, who I voted for in 2000, 2004, and 2008. Introduced him as a speaker at a campaign rally in 2004, and generally like him very much, but I don't think this is the greatest take. So why is Donald Trump and his associates the worst in all the ways he described GOP in history? Trump has talked about wanting to end the war on Ukraine. He doesn't. There's really not much daylight between him and Harris on Israel, which is unfortunate. But as far as misogyny goes, I mean, the Democrats aren't really doing anything to protect abortion rights. Trump doesn't seem like he wants to do anything in one way or another about abortion rights. He wants to leave it up to the states. And of course, the support of the Democrats for women's spaces in sports being invaded by males who say they feel like they're a woman. The Democrats are all on board with that. The Republicans are against that. I'm sorry, but I'm with Trump and the Republicans on that particular issue. It doesn't do much good as far as climate goes to acknowledge that human-caused climate change is happening, but really not do much of anything about it. So yeah, I don't buy that this is. I mean, how is Trump worse than George Bush, who, although he didn't commit a genocide like Biden and Harris are doing, because didn't deliberately intentionally target a group for extermination like Israel did, and like the Biden administration is collaborating in their doing. But the Iraq War was very destructive. The Afghanistan War was very destructive. There were people tortured under the Bush administration, and on and on. So tell me, Ralph, how is Trump worse than that? Or, worse than Harris? I don't think he is. As evidenced by the fact that she's campaigning with Liz Cheney. I mean, you see Liz Cheney at more campaign rallies than you do Tim Walz or VP pick. As far as Bernie Sanders, is he still the most popular elected official in our country? I seriously doubt it. The way he's just blatantly sold out in the last few years. He's caved to the Democrats who cheated him out of the nomination twice in both 2016 and 2020. Campaigned vociferously for the election of Hillary Clinton in 2016 and Joe Biden in 2020, and Kamala Harris, and before her, Joe Biden, this election cycle, even to the point of lying about Joe Biden's mental condition and downplaying collaboration of the Biden administration in Israel's genocide. I'm not sure if you did a poll of people's opinion, people's approval of Bernie Sanders, you would get anything like the results we got in 2016, where indeed he was by far the most popular elected official in the country. Don't buy that he is any longer. Most people know Bernie Sanders is a sellout, just like AOC is a sellout. AOC is less popular than Nancy Pelosi. Wouldn't be surprised if Bernie Sanders were close to that these days. Anyway, so I voted today for Claudia de la Cruz. Not only because I didn't have any other option as far as left-leaning third-party candidates, but also buying into Western propaganda narratives about countries like China and Russia and Syria that the U.S. considers official enemies. Plus Butch Ware kind of doubling down on that as far as his buying into the Uyghurs are being oppressed by the Chinese government narrative, and just having a very dismissive attitude toward anybody who disagreed with him, blocking them, preventing them from replying, hiding replies, and personally attacking them as a group. That just really turned me off of the Green Party ticket. So I would have voted for Claudia de la Cruz, even if I lived in, say, Michigan, where Jill Stein is running fairly strong due to the large Arab American population there. But I do hope that the Green Party does well today, gets more ballot access for next time, and gets more federal funding. But I don't really, in the long term, I don't really see the Green Party as the vehicle for third-party independent politics in the United States. I would like to see a real workers' party formed, like is starting to be formed in the UK, led by George Galloway. Maybe we can have that someday. There is precedent for tiny opposition parties coalescing into larger forces that changed the course of history in the United States. So in the 1840s, you had the Liberty Party, an anti-slavery party that got very little support in presidential elections in the 1840s. And in fact, it's actually the one historical case where you could argue that the third-party candidate, quote-unquote, spoiled the election of one of the major party candidates. Henry Clay of the Whig Party was slightly less pro-slavery than Andrew Jackson. Didn't want slavery to come to new states, but on the other hand, didn't want to get rid of it in the states where it still existed either. But supporters of the Whigs blamed James Burney for the loss of the 1844 presidential election by the Whig Party candidate Henry Clay, because in the state of New York, James Burney from the Liberty Party got a much larger share of the vote than the margin of victory of Andrew Jackson over Henry Clay. So, you could argue, well, maybe, but ultimately it's the same sort of bankrupt argument. How do they think about it? That is being made today, because no abolitionist was going to vote for even a half-hearted pro-slavery party like the Whigs. But at least mathematically, the Liberty Party got a much larger, or James Burney got a much larger share of the vote in New York than the margin of difference between the two candidates. That hasn't been the case for any presidential election that the Green Party is involved in. In Florida, Ralph Nader got many times the number of votes as the margin of difference between Gore and Bush, but tens of thousands of votes were suppressed. Tens of thousands of voters' ability to vote was suppressed in the state of Florida, and they didn't count the votes properly. So you can't really say that there was any opportunity for a free and fair election in the state of Florida in 2000. Whereas, as far as I know, there's no evidence that things were rigged in New York in 1844. Anyway, so however you voted today, I hope you voted against genocide, whether it be for Jill Stein or Claudia de la Cruz or Chase Oliver of the Libertarian Party, or Cornel West, who's running as an independent. The Democrats need to hear from us that we do not consider their policies to be acceptable. The genocide, of course, being the number one thing, but so many of their other policies are just not any better than the Republicans. So what about after the election? Well, as I often say, and many of us on the left often say, what happens outside of the voting booth is far more important than who you vote for. As Howard Zinn once said, it's a lot more important, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember his exact words, but he said it's a lot more important. It's a lot less important who's sitting in the White House than who's sitting in, who's going on strike, who's protesting, who's boycotting, who's engaged in direct action to fight for peace and social justice. Overwhelmingly, the evidence suggests that's what makes the biggest difference in the course of history, in the fight for ending wars and putting human needs first. We're not going to get there. We're not going to vote our way out of the mess that we're in. All right. Thanks for listening today, and happy voting if you have any intention of voting. Take care, everybody.